Welcome to Peace is a Choice, the podcast where we explore how conscious awareness can help us cultivate inner peace and transform our lives. I'm Natasha Wallace, and in each episode, we'll hear from guests about their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced, and how they've found greater levels of peace in their lives and positively impacted the lives of others. So today I'm joined by the formidable Alison Dunn, a powerhouse for social justice, collaboration and long-term change in the Northeast and beyond. As CEO of the Society Matters Group and Citizens Advice Gateshead, she led the organisation from the brink of insolvency to becoming a purpose-led social enterprise, improving the lives of thousands of people in the communities and supporting hundreds of employees and volunteers who make that possible. Beyond her CEO work, Alison plays a vital role across the region through a number of voluntary and strategic positions, helping to shape how organisations, councils and communities respond to inequality. Welcome to the podcast, Alison.
Tasha, thank you very much. And what an introduction. Who wouldn't want to be described as formidable?
Well, I mean, yeah, well, actually, are you okay with being described as formidable?
I absolutely am. I'm going to take that. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you don't have a huge amount to do anything other than change the world.
Well, I mean, that's my reason for existing, isn't it? I do think that my sort of personal identity is wrapped up in all of that stuff. So actually, yes, pretty much every waking hour is spent on that very topic.
Really? So actually, what motivates you to get out of bed?
Every day there is joy to be found in having a job that you love. I know it's a cliche when they say, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But that is absolutely what I have managed to do. The job that I'm doing is something that is just so intrinsically linked to my values. It's so wrapped up in who I am as a human. It's so wrapped up in how I want the world to be, how I want society to treat its most vulnerable citizens, that every day just feels like a gift. And, I wake up every day ready for the challenge that's ahead. And, some days are harder than others. But generally speaking, I look back on my week and I think, yeah, we've shifted some stuff this week. It's been a good week.
That's got to be hugely influenced by your mindset, because I think even people who manage to find the job or the profession or the business that they thought they always wanted, some of those still don't bounce out of bed in the morning thinking, come on, here we go. To what extent do you think your mindset influences your day-to-day life?
I suppose the obvious answer has to be that it must be true, but it's not something that I'm consciously sort of crafting. It's just how I am. I'm very lucky to be an incredibly resilient and adaptable individual, and I do have boundless energy, and I always have. My days have always been long, but I'm also not without discipline. I mean, there are things that need to happen in order to protect your energy. So you can't just keep going at all cost. And I'd also be lying if I said that there's not some days that are harder than others and some periods in your life that are harder than others. But as a general rule, I work very hard to protect my energy, and more days than not, I am full of energy and ready for whatever's ahead. But it would be disingenuous to say that there's not harder days too.
And tell us a little bit about your journey, because you started off as a lawyer, didn't you?
Well, yes. I mean, my journey's been not typical. So I left school at 16 with no qualifications and actually very little idea of what I wanted to do. I remember a conversation when I was a child with a significant adult in which I was told that I would be a secretary until I got married. So, the implication there being that my job was set out, but also that I would be married and then I wouldn't work because my husband would look after me. And I didn't seek to question that at sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age. So at 16, when I turned up in a solicitor's office as an office junior, ready to start my secretarial sort of career, I was astonished to find that the people in those roles were just ordinary folk. I imagined that they would all be privately educated, that they'd perhaps gone to boarding school, that they'd all gone to Oxford or Cambridge and would be so much cleverer than I could ever have hoped to be. But they were just ordinary people. They lived down the road from where I lived. They went to the same sort of schools that I did. But it had never been made visible to me that that might be something for me. And I remember, Natasha, feeling absolutely furious about it. It was a physical feeling of rage that sort of went through my body. And I just thought, right, okay, you've got a choice in this moment. You can continue on this path, earning at the time the princely sum of £27.50 a week, or you can do something about it. So I started that job in the May, and in the September, I enrolled myself in night school. I got my GCSEs, I got my A-levels. I persuaded the firm to put me through Open University, and I qualified as a lawyer. But it was never my intention when I left school.
Why did the lawyer path appeal to you?
Oh, well, I have always had a strong sense of social justice. Even as a little child, I was always the defender of people who I perceived to be less able to stand up for themselves than I could. I remember in primary school, we're talking about maybe age 5, 6, 7, playing with two young girls, one of which I think would probably be in a special educational needs school now, and another girl who was a Chinese girl who was very unusual in the 70s for people to have come from other places. And these girls were relentlessly bullied. And I, doggedly put myself between them and everybody else. And again, I remember an adult saying to me, if you continue to play with those children, nobody will want to play with you. And even at 6 or 7, I knew that that was not right. And actually, it just made me even more determined to do that. Now, they didn't ask for that and they may not have wanted it. But, it's just always been there. And my mother would often say, when I was an adolescent, that although I was generally well behaved, the thing that got me into trouble was my mouth, because I was always running off about some injustice that I thought somebody had experienced. So it's been a very, very strong motivator for me, even from a very young age. So I suppose it made perfect sense that I would have a career that was, had social justice threaded throughout it.
Out of interest, I mean, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment associated with what feels like inequality and inequity, and that there seems to be a big uprising. I mean, it's been going on for a few years now with people saying like, this isn't right and this isn't fair. And of course, there's a big divide. And I can't help but think that it's really, really affecting people. This divide in the world and this lack of justice in places where people think there should be justice is starting to really get people down. Like, how do we navigate that? How do we get up every morning and hold the faith and make a positive contribution rather than just thinking it's all falling apart and actually we're doomed?
Well, what we don't do is turn on each other, and that's what's happening. We see that on social media, we see it on the telly, we see our most vulnerable people being sort of vilified and sort of held up as almost demonic. We have to think critically about who's benefiting from that type of behaviour and sort of that incendiary type of rhetoric. And it's not ordinary folk, actually. So being really cognizant of that, not forgetting that when we are vilifying people, they're humans with feelings and experiences and all of the things that come with that. The real challenge is that we tend to think wrongly, actually, that whether people are successful or not is dependent on them as individuals, but actually it's the systems and the structures within which we live and exist that often cause the inequities that you've just described there. So I hear people all of the time talk, they'll say things like, well, I've done all right because I've worked really hard. The implication being that other people aren't working hard. Now, I know lots of clients, so I've talked about my time as a lawyer, but I'm now the CEO of Citizens Advice. And the clients that come in to see us are incredibly hardworking. Some of them are holding down 2 and 3 jobs at the same time. Yeah. And it's not that they are somehow feckless or that they are inefficient in some way. It's simply that the systems and the structures within which we live hold them back. Rather than focusing on the deficiencies of individuals and turning in on one another, we need to think about those systems and structures. But also we need to place ourselves within them, because it's very easy to be critical of what's going on in the world. But actually, look at your local community. What can you do to help? Roll your sleeves up, go and volunteer. Think about whether you're voting. Think about how you can be the best employer that you can be. So there's lots and lots that we can do beyond just pointing the finger at other people and saying, you're the problem.
Why do we do that?
Because it's hard, okay? So, we are all feeling like we are putting more into the system and getting less out of it. And that makes us look at other people, but also the media plays a huge part in where our gaze lands. So I'll give you an example of that. Just yesterday, I was driving home in the car, and the first 4 news items on BBC News were all about immigrants and crimes that immigrants had allegedly perpetrated. Now, I've no doubt that that news is correct, but the positioning of that as if white English people don't ever commit crimes,
Mm.
it sends our gaze that way. It's disproportionate coverage of a really tiny, tiny number of people. So, again, if we think about sexual violence and there's this conversation around refugees and asylum seekers being a threat to women and girls. Now, there is absolutely no doubt, and I don't seek to diminish those crimes, that has happened. But by not also accepting that the majority of sexual violence is actually perpetrated by white males in the home, by people that we know. We
Yeah.
don't hear about that, do we? But we heard
No.
4 consecutive news items yesterday on BBC News about immigrants. So that forces, when you're having a tough time, that's forcing your gaze that way.
Mm. Yeah, and actually, there's something about educating ourselves. I mean, I had a conversation this morning with somebody who I don't know very well, but they were talking about immigrants, and they said it's really terrible, all these immigrants in the country, and actually, there's a hotel down the road from where we live, and it's full of immigrants, and actually, they all just need to go. And they said, oh, there's a lot of crime, and they're committing a lot of acts, and actually we can't control the people in our own country, the people who are already here who are not immigrants. If they commit crimes, they're living here anyway. But do we know what the statistics are? Like, do we know that immigrants come in and commit a disproportionate number of crimes? What's the data behind that?
The data absolutely is there, but the way that it's portrayed in the media and the constant fixation on it is making it seem like a far bigger problem than it is. Now, I can guarantee you that if we stop the boats tomorrow, that the NHS would not be fixed. Our education system would not be fixed. The potholes in our roads would not be fixed. Our prisons would still be overflowing. The reason that those things aren't working is not because of migrants coming over in boats. They will still need fixing. Less than 2% of the welfare bill gets spent on asylum seekers, refugees and migrants. So the data is there. But for whatever reason, we've moved into this space of misinformation where even, our politicians, our journalists are not playing fair. And we seem to have just lost the ability to think critically, to challenge appropriately. If somebody says something loud enough, we seem prepared to accept it as truth.
Yeah, yeah. But do you think it's because there's a lot of fear in the system? I feel as though increasingly society is trying to be very protectionist, and they're worried, they're so defended, they're so worried about their own position that actually it's just easier to say all those people over there are wrong and they're doing the wrong thing. And actually, if that was right, I'd be okay.
That's absolutely what's happening. When we are feeling under attack as humans, we look for somebody more vulnerable than ourselves and we look to blame them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So it sounds like part of the answer is that we need to educate ourselves and arm ourselves with the right evidence and data so that we can actually have a balanced opinion on this.
Always think, who stands to benefit from me believing that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But there's also, I mean, going back to the mindset thing, as part of the conversation I had this morning, this person also said, oh, and it looks like we might be heading for war. And I mean, and I don't want to, I don't want to be reductionist about that thought. If that is likely or possible, that's terrifying. But actually, if we're all sat there thinking that that is true, it's a very debilitating thought.
Yeah.
We're just about to head into war. Once again, like, where's the evidence and action? And I said to them, look, I don't think that's likely to happen. I think that would be terrible, and of course it's worrying, but I don't think it's likely to happen. You focus on the things you can control. So I mean, that's what I ended up saying. I said, look, I think the easiest way to get through right now in this world that seems absolutely bonkers is that all we can really do is focus on what we can control and stop, worrying about the things that are out of our control.
Which sort of brings me back to the point that if you are really worried about society, ask yourself, what are you doing to help society? Because there will be a community centre in a town or a village near you that
Yeah.
needs your support. There will be a homelessness charity or a veterans charity or an animals charity or a young people's charity that is looking for your support. Now, that doesn't have to be your money. It can simply be your time, your expertise. There is so much that we can do that can support our communities, the people that we say we care about here and now today, in a place that we can see next to our home. It's as simple as that. If just 2% of people went on to volunteer of the UK population, that would transform how we feel about society.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. Yeah, actually get into the weeds and
Yeah,
actually
instead of complaining about
yeah,
all the things that aren't
yeah,
happening, go and
yeah,
make
yeah, yeah.
something happen.
Absolutely. And actually, so a lot of the work I do with leaders is about focusing on the solution rather than the problem. We
Yeah,
get very, very bogged down in the problem, don't we? What's going to happen? How terrible is this? Who did it? Whose fault is it? Why me? Rather than channeling our energy towards, right, there is a problem here. So what part am I playing in helping to
yeah.
fix it? But it is a mindset shift. And I think people are struggling to access that at the moment. So I'd like to come on to leadership. So you've won many awards for being a fantastic leader, and that's hard. You have to actually be a good leader to win an award. Firstly, congratulations on all of the
Thank you.
awards that you've won for leadership. But I know that you didn't start off feeling like a great leader. I know that
No.
that's been a journey of discovery. So tell us a little bit about that, where you started and where you are now and what that journey's been like.
Yeah, so I've mentioned that I qualified as a solicitor, and that was probably in the sort of the 90s, noughties. And as a female working class person working in private law firms during that time, it's fair to say that I never really felt like I fitted in that environment. And I was incredibly proud to have achieved that, qualification and to be working in that field. I never really fitted in, if I'm honest. Consequences of that was that in order to survive, I took on many characteristics that were quite male orientated and became very hard edged. I wasn't alone. If you look at sort of the media from the 90s and noughties, it was very much the sort of the portrayal of the 90s super bitch where, you wanted to be successful, you wanted to be a mother, the wheel was falling off, it was because you wanted too much, you couldn't have it all. I epitomised that stereotype during that time. So when I came to the third sector, I came with a lot of very hard edges. So I was very personally ambitious, very driven, very much about the stick rather than the carrot. That can be self-perpetuating because it does actually work to a degree. So, my first few years in the voluntary sector were very, very much about performance management and driving productivity and finding efficiencies and striving, striving, striving. But then I had a moment where a staff member said to me, so our vision in the charity was always to create a fair society for all with lives well lived.
Mm.
And the staff member said to me, "You are so driven for our clients, but what about us?
Oh, wow.
Have you ever stopped to think about what a good life looks like for us?" And Natasha, that was one of those moments where I just thought, wow, no, we have not stopped to think about what that means for our staff. Even as I'm recounting this story to you now, I've just had a little chill because it really was one of those absolute moments. So we sat down as a leadership team and we actually had the conversation about, are we going to defend this position or are we actually going to do something about it? And we wrestled with that for some time, but eventually we concluded that actually what we really wanted was a good life for everybody. It's not just those people over there, it's for everybody. We started a journey of just completely reimagining sort of who we wanted to be as employers. And at this point, I had a great leadership team. They're absolutely fantastic. We're already working as a collaborative. And we completely reimagined what we wanted to be as employers. And once we repositioned ourselves as actually wanting a great life for our staff as well, so many fabulous things started to happen. employee satisfaction improved, how we felt about ourselves, how we portrayed ourselves to the outside world. Our quality of advice started to go up, our retention improved. Everything just started to slip into place. But it was literally like one day we were doing it that way and the next day we were doing it this way.
What time period did that happen over? How long did it take for you to start seeing different results?
So that conversation probably happened about 10 years ago. It took us about 6 months to wrestle with it and decide what we were going to do with it. I don't think we ever thought we weren't going to do something with it. Like once it hit us like a truck and we were always going to do something with it. But what was it we were going to do? And we came back with a completely renewed strategy that actually had our people at the heart of it. And it's been an evolution ever since. So, that we initially started off by thinking about how we could improve terms and conditions, how we could put workforce development at the heart of what we were doing, how we would become a real living wage employer, all the sorts of stuff that you would expect. But if we think about where we are today, 10 years on, that's evolved into we are a 4-day working week employer, which means that we pay our staff 100% of their salary in return for 100% of their productivity, but they only work 80% of the week. So they work 4 days for 5 days pay, provided they can do as much in 4 days as they can in 5. We're also an anti-racist organisation, which means that we are working really hard to make sure that not just that people from Black, Asian and marginalised communities are represented in the workforce, but they're also in leadership positions. That's something that we're working on. We continue to be a real living wage employer, but we do other things like, we provide free breakfasts and free lunches for our staff. Now, we're not talking about a cafeteria here. We're talking about non-perishable goods. So I don't want to overstate that. But the feedback we've had from people has been, that's been really helpful to them, particularly as they get to the end of the month. Because the truth is, if you work in the voluntary sector, you're not working in it for riches. We try really hard to pay the market rate for our salaries, but actually, the work is hard, it's very grueling. So you have to look at other ways to care for your people. So it started off very much about just doing the basics right through to really now today working incredibly hard to make sure that, the emotional well-being of our staff is maintained, that we are at pace with the market in terms of our salaries, that we are providing opportunities for people to reach their full potential, even if that means that they will leave us. That's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. If you want to develop yourself beyond the opportunities that we can provide, I'm totally comfortable with that because I think that that is the role of a good employer.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting, actually, the response that you had. I can imagine that in a lot of instances, that employee would have had that conversation with a leader to say, and what about us? And the leader would have gone away thinking, bloody hell, another unhappy employee, or they're always bloody moaning. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think generally speaking, that would have just felt like another annoying thing to deal with that they
Yeah.
probably aren't going to do anything about. But you took that really seriously. Why did you?
I can only tell you about the feeling that I had when they said it. It literally stopped me in my tracks. I mentioned earlier about going into that solicitor's office and having a really physical response to something. It was another one of those moments. It just absolutely knocked me over in the same way that did. I can get into the detail and I'm very pragmatic in terms of actions that I need to take. I am very much also a heart and stomach type of girl. And it was a real physical response that I had to that made it impossible to ignore.
And what advice would you give to other leaders? Like, I had a really interesting conversation yesterday. So I'd been running some leadership development this week. And in one of the sessions I ran, a couple of the people in the session, leaders, had said they're both on anti-anxiety medication and that they suffer really severely with anxiety. Now, I mean, they must have been in their 20s, young leaders. And so then I was talking to one of the senior leaders in the business yesterday to say, oh, there's quite a lot of anxiety. And I worked with about 35 leaders this week. And enough of them were stressed and feeling anxious for me to raise it as an issue. So I said to him, yeah, there's some real anxiety in the team. It's Q4, so I mean it's pressure anyway. His reaction was, oh, the youth of today, or the younger generation, and these leaders are maybe in their 20s and 30s that I was working with over the course of a couple of days. It was like they just need to like get a grip. We never used to talk about anxiety. We just had to come in and do the job and get it done and go home. And like, what is all of this? Why are they even talking about anxiety in a leadership development program? And I mean, he had quite a strong reaction to it. Now, don't get me wrong, this leader is amazing. I mean, the fact that I'm even working with his teams in the first place points to the fact
Yeah.
that he buys into leadership development, he buys into conscious leadership. However, this conversation was quite difficult for him to navigate, because he was a bit like, why are we coddling? Why are we talking about stress? Why are we talking about anxiety? People just need to like get a grip and get on. What would you say, based on all of your experience, to a leader like this? And I'm sure there's plenty of leaders who feel like this, who maybe are slightly older and haven't experienced a lot of this sort of mental ill health conversation in the workplace. Like, how would you say they should approach it?
Well, I think back to the days when we were using the rod rather than the carrot, and we probably had a lot more of that, because if you're not providing the psychological safety for people to be able to have a conversation about what they need to be well, then you're going to get that sort of stuff. I think as we've moved through the years, we have now created the psychological space for people to tell us when they're feeling like that. But also, we've set an expectation in our business that you can go and collect your kids at the end of the day. You can take time off if you've got caring responsibilities. You can take, work flexibly. You can do all of your work in 4 days. And therefore, those outbreaks of anxiety are less. But when they do happen, people have the psychological safety to be able to say, do you know what, I'm not feeling great. So I had a conversation just yesterday with a senior leader in my business who needed a couple of hours off in the day to go and deal with a family issue. Well, fine, if that's what you've got to do, go and
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
So I think that, I would say it's always been present. But the thing with anxiety is as well, the thing about peace actually is, your podcast is entitled, Peace is a Choice. It is a choice, but it doesn't happen accidentally. And unless you create the conditions for peace, you are going to have leaders experiencing the anxiety that you have just described. So I am somebody who's been very, very lucky. I've had very little anxiety in my life, very little low mood. I'm just an incredibly resilient person. But it's also not accidental. So, I have a red line where, I go to bed at the same time every night. I get up at the same time every day, including weekends. I know the food that is good for me. I know the relationships that are good for me. I surround myself with people who are positive, and I will delete people from my life who are not bringing me peace and joy. So I've cultivated an environment in which peace is possible. And I've sought that for my workforce as well. So if you're not providing that environment, then you are going to get those outbreaks of anxiety, because being a leader is really tough. But also, I would say that in my 20s, the age that these folks are that you're talking about as well, I was still very much playing at being a leader and emanating other leaders that I saw. I was almost pretending because I didn't have my own style. And with age comes wisdom as well, and almost permission to be your authentic self. So it's a combination of age, wisdom, but also cultivating the right environment for the peace that you need.
I think that's just so incredibly wise. And interestingly, I've just been reading a 20-year study of the research into leadership burnout, which came out of Oxford University. And the punchline basically is, for leaders to not burn out, they have to be self-aware and they have to take care of themselves. And you've just encapsulated in all of the things that you do there a level of self-awareness and a level of self-care that allows you to basically stay on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, but also, Natasha, I don't want to sound too self-righteous. Occasionally the wheels fall off. and the things, the discipline that I know that I need to engender to stay well, it does sometimes flex and things go wrong. But when that happens, the safety net has been created in a leadership team that is absolutely bonded together. So if I look at my leadership team, they are entirely different to me. So, my commercial director, I've got a service delivery director, I've got a chief operating officer. Their personalities are really different to me, but we're all bonded by the same value set. So when the wheel does come off, they're just around me and they make sure that everything continues to go as it needs to, and I do the same for them. I've also cultivated that at home. So I wouldn't want to give the impression that we're Pollyanna perfect here, but I do understand what is required to stay well. And most of the time, I'm very disciplined about making sure that those conditions exist.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a really valuable point that you make about peace isn't it doesn't sort of happen accidentally.
Yep.
You've got to be quite intentional about curating a life
You do.
that enables you to perform, but it enables you to stay resilient and happy and
Yeah.
all those sorts of things. But it does require you paying attention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The other thing I really wanted to talk to you about today is the fact that you're writing a book. So I'm really excited about this book. I can't wait for it to be finished. So, no pressure. And we could have waited until you published it to talk about it, but I was quite keen for you to be able to share what it's all about earlier than that, and we can get everybody else excited too. So can you just tell us a little bit about what it is and what led you to write it?
Well, what you are giving me here, Natasha, is the gift of accountability, because once I go public, this will be my very first sort of public outing. There'll be no going back, will there? So the working title for the book is Friend or Foe. And it's about how women enable or disable other women. And within the book, there's a little bit of me looking back at some of the women who have enabled me over the years, but also some of the women who have disabled my progress. But actually, what I want to do is look more broadly than my own experiences and just talk a little bit about the psychology behind why some of that stuff happens. And bring all of that to life. So it's called Friend or Foe, and it really is about women and how we impact on one another.
When you mentioned this to me, it instantly made me start thinking about female interactions and female relationships.
Yeah.
And it sort of, I guess, made me become conscious of something I don't really pay a huge amount of attention to.
Yeah.
But I think most women, as soon as you said to them, actually, some of the women around you will be like your biggest cheerleaders, and others actually will get in the way of progress, or they won't be kind, or they won't behave well around you. I think we could probably all as women think of the women that fit into those categories.
Yeah.
But I guess what I became really fascinated about when you mentioned it is why are those dynamics playing out in female relationships?
The book isn't finished, so more may reveal itself. But the sort of the key themes that are coming out is, there are some women who are alpha females. So, they rise to the top, often through great personal hardship. And when they look back down at the ladder, they think, well, you're not comparable to me, you're not working as hard as me, or perhaps if I let you up here, you're going to take some of what I've got, so I'm just going to keep you where you are. And I think everybody would recognize an alpha female in their network. They're all over the place. And I think, I would say that at times I have played that role as well, particularly earlier on in my career when I was feeling less secure about my position in the world. Then there are some women who believe that men are simply more capable than women and therefore, should be in positions of power. I have heard women say that, women shouldn't be prime ministers or presidents or members of parliament or FTSE 100 leaders because they're just not as capable as men. And that is a fact. Even if they don't overtly think it, it happens sometimes implicitly. So I think, when we spoke, I shared an anecdote. Sir Nigel Wilson, who was the CEO of a FTSE 100 company, he had a big push. He tells this story about this big push that he had for female leadership in his organisation. And he gave some female leaders the mandate to go and recruit a female senior executive, and they came back with an all-male shortlist, despite having permission, a mandate to recruit somebody. Now, the implication of that is that, they went through all of those CVs and concluded that the men were the best for the job. Now, thankfully, he was really committed to his cause, sent them away, and ultimately there was an internal female candidate appointed to that role. But that's a really practical example of how, even when women are given permission to elevate other women, they come back with a male alternative. And then there's something about how we're brought up as children and the roles that we slip into. As women, we're often told to behave ourselves, to be quiet, to smile, to be pretty, to be kind, to be quiet. And that causes us to really bristle when we see women who are behaving outside of what we believe to be a good girl. And there's a great author and leadership guru called Michelle Minnigan who writes about this very thing. She's got a book called Good Girl Conditioning, which is just about this, the impact of good girl conditioning on how we move into adulthood. So there's something about, we don't like it when we see other women perhaps behaving in an outlandish way, perhaps being really aggressive in their ambition, perhaps being sexually overt in a way that good girl conditioning doesn't, recognise as being proper. So we start to criticise and pull those women down and to actively sabotage them. And then there's a group of women for whom they simply can't accept that gender inequality is a thing. Often it's because they themselves are experiencing disadvantage and oppression. And it's really hard for them to accept that, gender inequality is a thing. So, and the way that I explain this is, if you have experienced sexual violence and you go to the police, you want to believe that you will be treated with fairness, but actually only 2% of recorded rapes ever result in charges. I mean, that is a startling statistic. So systemically, there are huge inequalities in the way that women are treated in the criminal justice system. This is just one example. So, there's four sort of categories. There's the alpha female. There's the idea that men are simply more capable. There's the way that we're brought up as children to believe that we have a place in the world and it's often quiet, subservient and nurturing. And then there's this idea that, gender inequality isn't a thing because we just simply can't face into it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that is so fascinating. And I guess it makes me really curious about what difference you want this book to make. So once it's published, I guess, why did you write it in the first place?
There was two things that happened. My goddaughter contacted me and asked me if I would do a webinar. And she works for a global company. And it just so happened that the HR department of that global company was in America. And despite the fact that I was doing this for free, I was instructed not to use the word inequality in my presentation because that is a dirty word in the United States of America at the moment. And nobody in the USA was permitted to listen to the webinar. And I just thought, that was the first moment where I thought, this is just bonkers. We're actually this is real and it's being censored. And, back to our earlier conversation about misinformation and who stands to benefit from that. So that was the first awakening that actually I had a role to play in this. And then the second thing was that I've had some really, really horrible experiences on social media where I've been absolutely just dragged around the houses. And I wondered where all the women were when that was happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it got me thinking about the role of women and how we support one another. And not just my own experience on social media, but seeing other women on social media and how they are treated and wondering where the female allies are. We talk a lot about male allies and the importance of men stepping forward, but I wondered where the women were when these terrible things were happening. I mean, I was threatened with sexual violence on social media, but it's happened twice in my life. And yet no woman stepped forward despite the fact that there were literally hundreds of men piling onto that thread. So those two things happened really. There was the whole sort of, the intentional obscuring of the message around inequality. And I've been very concerned about this sort of right-wing geopolitical sort of nonsense that's coming in. And that was just a really practical example of that. And then the whole sort of, where are the female allies? We talk a lot about male allies, but actually, if the women can't even get themselves organised,
Mm.
what chance have we got? And then it just got me thinking about why that was. And the more I thought about it and the more I reflected on my own experiences and importantly, some of my own behaviours. Because again, I don't want to give the impression that I'm sort of skipping through life as this sort of perfect being. Like I have perpetrated some of these behaviours over the years.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
the,
yeah.
the book is very much, I'm trying to have a candid look back and an optimistic look forward,
Mm.
and to encourage women to recognise when they maybe could have done something different and helped another woman up instead of hindering her.
Yeah, absolutely. God, you've made me have a reflection of my own, like full disclosure. So I was sat down chatting to my 15-year-old daughter last night. She said, "Oh, I need to get in touch with Auntie Sapphire, my sister, because she likes Sabrina. They both like Sabrina Carpenter." And I think she said something like, because it'd be really good to go and see her in concert. So I might ask Auntie Sapphire if she'll go with me. And I had quite an extreme reaction, having been in HMV a couple of weeks ago and seen the front cover of Sabrina Carpenter's album, which is, I mean, for anybody who hasn't seen it, go ahead and, have your own look and make up your own mind. But it made me feel as though Sabrina Carpenter was almost undoing decades of work. My reaction was, I can't believe my 15-year-old daughter sees her as a good role model. And
Yeah.
actually, no, I absolutely don't want my 15-year-old daughter going to see Sabrina Carpenter on stage, sort of almost, being like objectifying women as being very sort of sexual beings. I had a
But
really
we are
extreme
sexual
reaction.
beings.
And
We
well,
are.
now I'm like, what was that? Like, I didn't stop for long enough last
Yeah.
night to even question where my reaction was coming from.
Yeah, because we are sexual beings, and why, I mean, I've seen the image and I'm not a fan of it, so I'm not defending it, but we are
Okay.
sexual beings. But where did that come from? Well, it probably comes from your conditioning as a child. We have very strong ideas about who is a good girl and who is a bad girl. Within all of that, there are so many shades of grey. It's a spectrum, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Massively, massively. And actually, I mean, I was brought up in an Irish Catholic family.
So, well, there's your answer then. That's why you've reacted in the way that you have.
Yeah, yeah, gosh. And actually, my daughter, well, I don't react very strongly to much, but my daughter was like, "Oh God, that was a bit defensive," and I was
Yeah.
like, "No, it wasn't." I just think that Sabrina Carpenter is not portraying what I think being a woman is all about in this, century. Um, but actually, that's my stuff.
Yeah.
So actually, that's an real time example, I guess, of exactly what you are talking about,
Yeah.
where we really do need to check ourselves and
Yeah.
our own reactions and our own responses to the women around us, because of course we're there, but just become part of the problem.
Yeah, and I see it all of the time, women commenting on what other women are wearing, what their bodies are like, what their hair's like, the choices that they're making, without any of the context or any of the understanding, and in really, really cruel, horrible, horrible ways.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. It's very easy to just not do it. Every thought that pops into our mind does not need to come out of our mouths.
Yeah. Well, God, if that was the mantra for life, I think the world would be a much better, more peaceful
Yeah.
place. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I'm really looking forward to receiving this book. As a woman who has always been a leader, who's been a business owner, who has experienced, lots of challenges, I would say, in terms of working with other women. I mean, being a strong woman in business causes all sorts of problems. I mean, and not just from women, but like in terms of men's view of
Oh,
how, I mean, I've had men say to me, "God, you're a bit feisty, aren't you?" Because
yeah.
I didn't agree with what my board had said. Or I've had another senior male partner saying to me, "You've got to dumb yourself down a bit. You're too intimidating because you come across as too intelligent." And I mean, I think that's a female issue when you are in a senior leader as a woman.
I mean, this is another podcast entirely, isn't it? But I have had so much of that. And to be fair, again, there have been times in my earlier career where I possibly played into that. But certainly as an older woman, I am far less tolerant of that nonsense and will absolutely just cut it off at the knees. I just won't accept it.
Yeah.
But also, you get women perpetuating those stereotypes as well and feeding into it, And I mean, how many times do you hear somebody say, well, she's bossy? That's my own sort of personal trigger, that bossy word.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm very, very intolerant of that now. And is just as important as your discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you're uncomfortable with the way that I present, that says more about you than it does about me. But I also think, the willingness to evolve and to look back over our lives and to see where we might have done things differently is just such a gift. And I see a lot of leaders who the minute they become leaders, it's almost like they think, that's it, I'm done now. I don't need any more personal development because I've made it. And they stay stuck. And, a great mentor of mine once said to me, authenticity is not an excuse to be an awful person. And I think if there's any sort of gift or parting message, it would be that, stay curious, but also constantly look back and see where you can make adjustments for what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
The book is a big part of that. It's a look back, and I'm really honest about where I've played a role in some of this stuff, but also being really, really clear about how I'm going to do stuff differently moving forward.
Yeah, and it sounds as though there's a level of humility that's required in order to be able to say, actually, yeah, that's not working, or I need to do better, or actually, if this is what I'm hearing from the people around me, I need to listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I mean, I could literally talk to you all day long because you are like a wise Gandalf type character. So I'm sure that the audience will have learned a huge amount from you. I can't wait for the book to come out. I'm really excited about it. So I'm sure. Well, actually, how will we know? How will we know when the books come out so that we can buy it?
Well, there's a few things happening. So it's not there yet, but there's going to be a landing page on my website for anybody who is interested to sign up to be notified when it's coming. So you can find me at alisondunn.co.uk, nice easy one, or on LinkedIn. But eventually, in the near future, there's going to be a podcast which is going to be talking to women about their experiences. So I'm going to be encouraging other women to have a little look back at some of their experiences and some of the women that they've come across, and encouraging them to think about what they're going to be doing differently moving forward. So watch this space for that as well.
Excellent. Brilliant. It sounds like there's a lot going on. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise, Natasha. And, I think that we've got many more conversations to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Pieces of Choice. For any information on what we've covered in today's episode, and to connect with my guests, head to the show notes. It would be great if you could rate and review the podcast and subscribe now so you don't miss out on any future episodes.